tech giants and our news organisations hotted up today. While the federal government is determined to introduce a news media bargaining code so that the likes of Google and Facebook pay for the news that they cut and paste, that's a kind way of saying what they do, a Senate committee is looking at the issue. Today, Google fired their biggest shot yet, threatening to close down the search engine to all Australians.
If this version of the code were to become law, it would give us no real choice but to stop making Google search available in Australia. Now, that would be a bad outcome for us, but also for the Australian people. Now, withdrawing our services from Australia is the last thing that I or Google want to have happen, especially when there is another way forward.
Now, given the fact that 95% of Australians frequently Google, that's the verb, not the institution, it would have an enormous impact on this country's search for information and the way we use the internet. Facebook too mentioned the possibility of dropping all news links if it was forced to pay for the privilege. Now, the Prime Minister was quite blunt in his reply today.
Let me be clear. Australia makes our rules for things you can do in Australia. That's done in our parliament, it's done by our government, and that's how things work here in Australia. And people who want to work with that in Australia, you're very welcome. But we don't respond to threats.
And to discuss the impact of today's war of words, I'm joined now by Stephen Fennick from techguide.com.au. Stephen, welcome to the program.
Good evening, Chris.
We're now getting dirty. To think that they would even suggest that we would no longer have access to the Google search engine is mind-boggling.
Yeah, this is quite a serious threat. It's pretty drastic, and I think they're trying to hold a gun to our head in these negotiations. But it would be like cutting their own leg off, because search is a massive part of their revenue here in Australia. They earned $5 billion in 2019, $160 billion globally. And that would be sort of cutting their nose off to spite their face in this situation. I think both sides of the argument need to be sort of aired out here. Like Google, their intention is to help readers find these articles and find websites, myself included. Tech Guide, I rely on Google to deliver readers to me. But when it comes at the cost of advertisers, that's a whole other story. And the background of that is that journalism costs money.
Yeah.
To maintain good journalism, you need to pay for it. And the situation at the moment is that Google and Facebook have cornered more than 70% of the digital advertising revenue. And rather than advertising directly with these news sites, they're going through Google. So I think these news sites, the major news outlets, are looking to some sort of compensation because Google are making money sharing their links and collecting our data. I just think they just want a fair go in these negotiations. Hopefully it won't get to the situation where Google pull up stumps and leave us entirely. But I think there has to be some sort of middle ground where Google realises the impact they're having on media in Australia.
Of course, this battle, the Australian battle over this issue, is so important, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I think the rest of the world is watching. And Australia, compared to other markets around the world, is relatively small. Imagine if this comes through and the US and Europe and those other larger centres, they see what's going on here. They may think, well, the media outlets in those territories might think, well, here's a chance for us to regain some revenue in the same way. So I think Google has to tread pretty carefully here. I think it needs to be a fair deal for both sides.
Tell me this, though. If we lost the Google search today, we have other alternatives in terms of search engines, don't we? Many of them.
Yeah, there are a few, but you mentioned earlier 94 or 95% of people use Google. That's their market share, which is massive. There are others. There's Bing and Ask and a few other minor search engines. Their business would increase rapidly if Google decided to pull out of the Australian market, no doubt. But it's when Google's in a situation now where they've virtually monopolised search, they run the table, and the ACCC's called them out on it, and this whole bargaining code is trying to get Australian media outlets a fair cut.